Hi guys, welcome back to Practically Creative with Melissa. If you're new here, welcome. I hope you'll hang around. Today we're going to do something very basic. This is an Omni Grid ruler. It's an 8-inch long ruler, and I'm going to show you how to read this ruler. I know that some of you more experienced quilters out there have done this without issues, but this tutorial is for people who are learning how to sew and or to quilt. And a lot of these rulers are commonly used in our sewing rooms. So I'm going to bring you down here where you can see the ruler up close, and I'm going to show you how to read it. So let's switch cameras and get to reading. Here is our OmniGrid ruler, and this is OmniGrid is a brand name. It's not required that you have this particular brand name, but I do want to show you the name. This one is yellow and black in case you have color issues. I also have some rulers that are pink and black that are easy to read, but let's start with this one. This ruler is 8 inches long. Here's your 7-inch mark, and then down here is your 8, even though there isn't an 8 marked on it. And this one happens to be 2.5 inches wide. 2.5 inches is a great width because you use it a lot when you quilt. You cut 2.5-inch squares for a lot of blocks, and most people use 2.5-inch wide binding. So that's why you have this 2.5-inch measurement. Each block or each part of this ruler has measurements. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And those are marked in small letters just so you can see them when you go to cut fabric. There are also some other numbers on here, 30, 45, and 60. And these aren't just random numbers. These tell you the angles that those lines are marked on. So this line is a 30-degree line, and this line is a 30-degree line. Over here, where these two crisscross, they are 45-degree angles or lines for you. And then down here is 60. The reason these are marked where they are is because they're also common angles that are used in quilt blocks. 45 is probably the most common, and it's used for half square triangles. But 60 and 30 come into play often. I'm not going to go into great detail on that because as you use this ruler, you'll get used to it. But one thing that's really nice about this is that if you lay, for instance, if you were wanting to cut something at a 45-degree angle, you would take your ruler and lay it across the piece that you want to cut and line that 45 mark up along the straight edge. And then you would get a 45-degree cut whenever you go across the fabric. I'm not going to cut this here today, but the same would apply for 60 or for 30. And like I said, they get used in for various reasons and in various blocks. The other thing for this is if you wanted to cut, for instance, a 2.5-inch piece of fabric, you would lay it down here so that the end of your ruler is straight across the straight edge of your folded fabric. You would cut here with your rotary cutter at this point, and then you would have a straight edge. And then you could go over to this side and cut that edge as well. The way I normally do it, because I'm right-handed, is I would lay my ruler here and I would get my straight edge cut. This would be cut with my free hand. I'd just go along here, and then I could come over here and just slide down and cut 2-inch strips all the way down. So that, or 2.5-inch strips all the way down. So that would be how you would use it for that. Now, on the ruler, if you get right down in here, you can see that there are little lines here, just like you would have on a school ruler that you used at school. And they are actually 1/8-inch marks here. And there's slightly bigger marks for the 1/4-inch and the 1/2-inch and the 3/4-inch. Then these in between are 1/8-inch marks. I'm not a fan of 1/8-inch cuts, but if you have to cut them, it's nice to be able to read the ruler to get there. I would normally, if something called for like 3 7/8, I would just go ahead and go up to 4 and then square my block down. We'll get into that with a different ruler later on. So here along the ruler itself, you can see this little line of dots. This is your 1/4 inch mark if you start from this side of the ruler. But I actually want to start over here. Okay, so starting at this side of the ruler, which is where the 1 inch mark comes from this side, you have 1 inch, 2 inch, and then you have your 1/2 inch over here. If you were measuring to cut fabric, this would be a 1/4 inch, a 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, 1 inch, and then 1/4 inch marks the rest of the way across. This is really handy, especially since there is a line, a light colored line going through all of those little 1/4 inch marks. So if you wanted to be able to cut a 1/4 inch of fabric for some reason, you can line your ruler up along the edge of the fabric and you can cut that 1/4 inch of fabric. The same applies if you needed a 1/2 inch, or if you needed 3/4 of an inch, or an inch, etc., all the way across. A lot of times what we'll do with our fabric is something called squaring up, and that would involve taking your ruler and laying it down here so that you get a straight edge, and you want to line up the straight lines on your ruler and or the edge of your ruler and make that cut, and then you have a straight line to be able to measure from all the way across. And I'm doing this backwards for me, so I'm used to starting at the right hand side, but you would be starting over here. So let's show you what that would look like. And you would, of course, be laying on a cutting mat, but I want you to see the grid lines on this ruler and not the grid lines on my cutting mat when we do this. So you line up the edge of your fabric with the edge of the ruler and you make sure that's straight. Now, most of the time when you cut, you want to cut standing up so that you can look straight down onto the ruler and see that your edges are straight and your lines are straight. I have arthritis in my hands, my back, and my legs, and a lot of times it's hard for me to stand up and cut. So I do mine sitting down, but I try to make sure that I bring the fabric in as close to me as I possibly can so that I can see it. And you would cut this straight edge off, and once you had your straight edge, then you could slide your ruler over to get whatever measurements you needed. If you knew that you wanted a straight edge here and you need a 2.5 inch cut, it's really easy. You don't have to move the ruler. But if you wanted a straight cut and you needed like 1.5 inches for it, then you would use the edge of your ruler and get 1.5 inches. This is a 1/2 inch over here. This is the 1st inch. And in order for me to do it, I would start so that if I had my straight edge, then I would line that 1/2 inch mark along that straight edge and go right straight down the fabric because I'm right-handed and that's how I cut. Okay, so this is a very short ruler for this. I don't recommend that you fold your fabric longer than your ruler is. So if I had my fabric laid out like this, I would want a ruler that's longer than this fabric to be able to do this. I recommend that when you cut fabric, you use a ruler that's longer than your fabric. I wouldn't try to use this ruler to cut this width of fabric. I would fold it over again. Sometimes if you're doing several layers, it can be intimidating to try to cut through a bunch of layers at one time. If you're new to cutting and you haven't cut a lot of fabric, I recommend cutting no more than 4 layers at a time. And when you cut, you want to lock your ruler down with your hand and make one quick cut. But always, always, especially if you're using a rotary cutter, make sure you keep your fingers over out of the way. A lot of times people put holders on their rulers to be able to keep their hands out of the way. Pop socket holders for phones work really well. I have a big ruler that I have one of those stick-on bathtub wall pulls that I put on. But this one's so small that I wouldn't do that. There are also grips that you can put on the back of your ruler. I know you can't feel this, but this surface is a little bit rough with the texture on the back of it. It has a little bit of a rough texture on the back of it. And you want to make sure that whenever you put your fabric down, you're not sliding it around like this. You do want to push down on that ruler and hold it in place before you cut. But keep your fingers well away from the edge of the ruler and just use your hand to put the pressure down there. Okay, if you have further questions, feel free to leave questions in the comments for me. We will be doing this with some other rulers, bigger rulers, square up rulers. But I kind of wanted to go into a good bit of detail for you on how this ruler works, the basics of how this ruler works, so that if you're new to sewing or to quilting, you can use this ruler to help yourself create beautiful things. You guys have a great day. Thank you for watching. My name is Melissa, and this is Practically Creative. Bye.